Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the competitiveness of Australia's international business. Now, I'm not going to talk, of course, from the perspective of the theory of competitiveness and factors like productivity and innovation and work practices and the macroeconomic factors, as important as those things are, of course, for competitiveness. I'm going to talk more from a practical perspective and bearing in mind the sorts of things that Austrade does. So Austrade, a good part of what we do are with firms who, well, the 8,000 to 10,000 firms who have turnover or exports between $250,000 and $50 million. And it's a pretty constant group. We deal with around about 11,000 firms during the course of a year, and a lot of them fit within that category. And they fit within generally the category of sectors of the economy which have productivity which are above our competitors. In areas like oil and gas, agribusiness, health, education, tourism, parts of manufacturing, those sorts of areas. So that gives you a sense of the perspective that I offer here. And when I talk about a practical perspective, I have in mind the sort of perspective that was offered recently by Richard Viator, a professor from the Harvard Business School, who wrote a book called How Countries Compete. It's been quite commented on over recent months. And he talked about the fact that business managers need to understand global markets and government policies so that they know their competition, so that they can evaluate international expansion opportunities, so that they consider the risks and benefits of investment and production decisions, and so they can anticipate changes to trade, exchange rates, investments, and the like. So those sort of practical perspectives is what I'd like to deal with. Now, of course, it's an ultra-competitive world that even our more successful industry sectors and firms face. And I'll give you two examples. Two of our key industry sectors, of course, are in tourism and education. But in tourism, there's a lot happening here in Australia. There's a lot happening in Asia as people move to a middle income situation and think about the education of their children, the food on their table, on their opportunity for leisure a little bit more. But it is a highly competitive world. People are competing quite actively for that tourist flow. And one of the measures, of course, is visa conditions. So recently, over the last year or two, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and most recently Singapore have all moved to 10-year visas for Chinese travellers. It's an international arms race for tourism. And so that's why I was quite pleased that, that Austrade, but most particularly the Department of Immigration, were able to work and support the government last week to announce that Australia will be moving to a 10-year visa for Chinese travellers. That's a very significant development. It's not the end of what we need to do to keep pace with this war to attract those very significant dollars from the tourism flows, but it's an indication of the sorts of things we've got to be doing. And similarly with education, I've been struck over the last couple of years with the sorts of conversations that ministers and others might have in Asia, whether India or Indonesia or China or elsewhere, around trade and investment opportunities, and how quickly those discussions move to a discussion about skills. People, governments, who are thinking about how they actually train and educate and skill cohorts of tens, if not hundreds of millions of young people. The opportunity there for Australia is quite significant. It's something we do well, but again, there's plenty of competition. The Americans are back in the game, the Canadians, the British and others are all working quite hard for this. At the moment, we're leading with our Department of Education colleagues a series of roundtables around the country to talk more about what this opportunity might be, where we think we need to be in 10 or 15 years' time to take advantage of that, what we need to do now to actually be better placed to take advantage of that. So it's a competitive world, and there's lots of reason to think forward, to think proactively about how we can engage with that sort of thing. So today I'd like to say a few words about some of the factors that we think affect the ability of our firms to take advantage of of international markets and the growth that we see. In particular, I'd like to mention the 4 major factors we think that can influence business success. That is free trade agreements, global and regional value chains, foreign direct investment, and lastly, market intelligence and insight. Of course, when we think of competitiveness, a traditional price versus quality approach is no longer the main game. While business wars are still being fought on these grounds for some products, maybe many products, thinking on these terms about the majority of Australian firms is not enough of the whole game. And for good reason, we've generally developed our market share and reputation based on quality. We're not a low-cost country, but we excel on the basis of highly developed human capital and the industry efficiencies we've developed. And we only need to look at some of our mining services sector or our medical research and related capacity to appreciate that. So businesses must continue adapting to both long-term and rapid change, innovating and anticipating emergency opportunities. This can redefine how companies approach their business and respond to accommodate market demand. It's partly driven by technology and reflects increasing global demand for sophisticated services. For instance, it would be perhaps remiss of an Australian company today, when thinking about the consumer market in China or Japan, not to at least consider an e-commerce strategy. In China, this would mean ignoring over 300 million shoppers and a sophisticated marketing and distribution system. So there's a lot possible in that field. And that's why, for instance, we're about to launch a major study on e-commerce with China, in which we'll be bringing down to Australia the 3 largest e-commerce platforms for a roadshow around the country, so that people can learn more about what this opportunity might be. So I'd like now to touch on some of the more specific factors. First of all, free trade agreements. We've got 9 free trade agreements currently in force: New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, the United States, Chile, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Malaysia, Korea and Japan. Korea and Japan, of course, are the most recent to enter into force, and they now account for, in total, 42% of Australia's trade. When the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement, signed last week, enters into force, hopefully by the end of the year, that figure rises to 70%. And early indications are that firms exporting to Japan and Korea are already benefiting from lower tariffs and provisions contained within the agreements. That's particularly important, for instance, to some of our horticulture or specialty seafood areas. However, it's fair to say that more needs to be done to raise awareness of the benefits within the broader business community. A number of business surveys have found Australian exporters are slow to take advantage of FTAs. Our own survey, the Australian International Business Survey, undertaken in conjunction with the Export Council and EFIC, found businesses were uncertain about how and whether FTAs applied to their business. A small number were unaware of the existence of some agreements altogether. So in conjunction with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Treasury, Austrade is currently conducting outreach seminars across the country, making sure firms understand how they can leverage FTAs to benefit their businesses. Fully utilising these agreements, particularly provisions relating to the establishment of services in market, will be critical to enhancing our long-term competitiveness. Increasingly important is our participation in global and regional value chains. They'll be a major factor affecting our business and support success for many firms, for many industry sectors. These chains exist across a variety of industries. They're particularly relevant, of course, to sophisticated or advanced manufacturing, such as those involved in the aviation and defence industries. Just to use one example, a small firm in Queensland is supplying parts for Boeing in the United States. They're entered into a collaborative relationship with firms in Singapore. And they're also currently in Poland on a mission that we've organised, looking at how to connect with a value chain that's placed there. So it's not just where demand might be ultimately, whether it's in the United States or in Asia, it's about value chains that stretch across all areas of the globe. Foreign investment, of course, is critical to the future competitiveness of our firms. Apart from the obvious benefits in terms of capital, skills and technology transfer, foreign investment provides market opportunities and can strengthen our participation in global value chains. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development found countries with high foreign direct investment relative to the size of their economy, such as Australia, tended to have a greater participation in global value chains. Between now and 2050, Australia's food industry will need up to $1 trillion in additional capital to meet global demand. Firms will need to overcome substantial challenges to stay competitive and to meet growing demand for high-quality produce from Asia's growing middle class. While it's not about picking winners, our work in investment attraction focuses on 5 key areas where Australia has a competitive edge that can be made even stronger: agribusiness and food, major infrastructure, tourism infrastructure, resources and energy, and advanced manufacturing, services and technology. And within this last category, we are primarily focused on medical and materials science and digital technologies. Lastly, market intelligence and insight. Developing capability to export, identifying opportunities, marketing and business development in overseas market has a direct impact on a firm's competitiveness. Despite the information revolution, we know from our recent survey that business is still constrained by access to accurate and relevant information about overseas markets. Information barriers in the form of local language, culture and business practices are cited as among the most significant. If we are to maintain and increase competitiveness, firms need to overcome these sorts of issues and make sure they have the insight needed to make informed decisions. This is particularly important for the services sector, which by its nature relies on good information and relationships. Overcoming information barriers are also communicating with offshore markets, highlighting Australia's ability to deliver smart, efficient and high-quality goods and services. One of the ways Australia is ranked is through, of course, this concept of perceptions. At Austrade, we have conducted our own research on perceptions of Australia. Information gathered in 5 different ASEAN markets gave us a rank of 7 out of 55 countries, behind Switzerland, Japan, Singapore, Canada, the United Kingdom and New Zealand. Australia was perceived to be a beautiful country that values education and offers an appealing lifestyle, and those are obviously strengths to have. But one area where we have been outranked relates to perceptions of how innovative we are. The research suggests that we have less well-known brands and are seen to be less technologically advanced than other countries. Along with strong messaging around clean and green for our agribusiness products, continuing to develop the reputation of our Australian companies as a source of innovative products and services will help them to compete, where it's based on objective information. In conclusion, many factors can influence success in the short term, but over the longer term, certain forces stand out more than others. In thinking about competitiveness, it is important to consider the practical challenges that firms face, as well as the opportunities. Firms that are exposed to international competition tend to be more efficient because they face pressures that force them to make improvements, cut costs and innovate. Free trade agreements can deliver increased opportunity as well as competition, and foreign investment will bring skills, know-how and capital. Firms that are part of global value chains will respond in different ways. And at Austrade, we aim to help business succeed through, among other things, the provision of insight and market intelligence, assisting firms to compete internationally. Thank you for your time.